Okay, so I want to talk to you today a little bit about PTSD. Three things that I think you need to know about PTSD. So, three things that will help you to see it from a different perspective. Okay, so the first thing is if we look at the maladaptive stress response, what do I mean by the maladaptive stress response? So as human beings, we have this amazing, very complex system called the nervous system. And our nervous system has been designed to keep us safe, right? Now, I'm sure everybody watching this video has heard about the fight, flight, freeze stress response. So essentially what happens is when we get stressed out, we are equipped to go into fight, flight, or freeze. And this really helps us. It keeps us safe. It's all about protection, all right? Our brain's primary function as a human being is to keep us safe, to protect us from danger. So what happens is with a normal stress cycle, we may go into fight, flight, or freeze, and then we are designed to come back to a state of homeostasis or equilibrium. We're designed to come back to complete that stress cycle. But what happens with post-traumatic stress disorder is when we are exposed to something traumatic. Okay, now, and remember, I want you to remember that trauma isn't necessarily about the event. It's about the internal process that happens inside us as a result of the event. So, not everybody is going to experience post-traumatic stress from having been in the same situation. But what really happens with PTSD is we go into an exaggerated form in our nervous system of stress. So the reason I mentioned the nervous system, I don't know if you perhaps have heard of polyvagal theory, which describes this really, really, really well. But essentially, when we go into fight, flight, freeze, and we stay there, and the amygdala or the fear center in our brain almost goes into a state of being on high alert. And that memory, that thing that happened to us, doesn't get processed properly by the brain. And so when we are triggered following the event, sometimes this can happen months or years after the trauma, we will get triggered by taste, sight, smell, touch, all of our any of our senses, okay? And what happens is when we get triggered, our brain will believe that we're back in that event. So we constantly relive that event then in our mind instead of remembering it. And that essentially is what post-traumatic stress is. Now, I remember I was involved in a terrorist attack, and I remember for years afterwards, I was in a constant state of hypervigilance. I had an extremely exaggerated startle response. My sensitivity to stress, to normal everyday stress, was heightened. I had nightmares, I had flashbacks. I probably didn't sleep well, or probably didn't sleep properly at all for many, many years. My anxiety levels were high. There was emotional dysregulation. There were, spikes of anxiety followed by moments of just feeling completely numb. These were all classic signs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And the reason I mentioned the nervous system is I think it's important to understand that PTSD, what the medical community defines as PTSD, is not a disorder. It's a normal response to an abnormal situation. So, the fear center in our brain goes into overdrive. All our perception of danger becomes heightened. We begin to see the world as this dangerous place. Everything begins to trigger us. That is PTSD. That is that maladaptive stress response where we aren't able to return to that place of emotional regulation, that place of where we're actually feeling safe in our nervous system. So part of the treatment, part of the therapy that is used in helping people to get over PTSD, helping people to heal from PTSD, should really address the nervous system regulation, techniques that can help your nervous system to get back to a place of being regulated, being in that state of calm and balance. Okay. So as an EMDR therapist, using what we talk about body to brain therapies, okay, and body to brain therapies, things like EMDR, which help to address the sensations in the body, because what happens when the nervous system goes into that stress response is you feel it in your system, you feel it in your body, you get the pounding, the pounding heart rate, you may get that sick feeling in your stomach. You may feel, that your muscles go into states of incredible tension. I used to grind my teeth a lot in my sleep at night. All of these are signs, sensations that arise in the body as a result of stress, in response to stress. So unless we address what's happening in the nervous system, what's happening in the body, we're not going to come back to that place of feeling safe, feeling grounded, feeling secure, because it's only when we get to that state of safety, of internal safety, that we actually able to process our trauma, that effectively, that is, because otherwise we're going to be constantly in that place where we feel that we need to protect ourselves. We will go into that place of bracing, of guarding, of being defensive. So the first step towards healing PTSD is to understand it's a maladaptive stress response. That's how you're wired neurologically. And the first step is to begin to practice techniques that will take you into that beautiful state where your nervous system is regulated, your emotions are regulated, you're calm, you're chilled, you're grounded, you feel safe and solid in your system. So thinking about it as a maladaptive stress response rather than a mental illness or a mental disorder, which is a way that society views post-traumatic stress. So that's the first thing. The second thing I feel that is really interesting to understand is when we look at the definition of the word trauma, in the Greek, trauma, the root meaning of that word is actually wound or hurt, okay, or defeat. That's what it actually means. So again, thinking of trauma, thinking of PTSD as a wound is actually true. Our executive function goes offline. Our executive function is essentially diminished when we are traumatized. We lose the ability to self-effecate. Therapists will talk about the neofrontal cortex, which is the front part of the brain, which is your rational, logical, reasoning section of the brain. That essentially becomes compromised, that goes offline. The fear center of the brain goes into high alert, which means that your perception of danger is heightened and increased. But things like, when it comes to learning and reasoning, those things can actually be compromised with people who are suffering from PTSD. I remember finding it extremely hard to focus on reading a book because in my mind, I would just dissociate so much. So thinking about PTSD in those terms, that the fact that it is actually a wound, your brain does have the ability to heal and to recover. Our brains are very, very plastic. We talk about the term neuroplasticity, which essentially is a brain's ability to put down new neural pathways. And again, this is one of the effects of therapies like EMDR, help the brain to create those new neural pathways. So the intense emotion that you may have, which may be associated to a memory, something that may have happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, but that may still really trigger you when you think about it, it's highly possible to desensitize, to become desensitized to those emotions that are connected to that memory. So instead of reliving the memory, like now I still remember the terrorist attack. I still remember other traumas that I was, traumatic events that happened to me in my life. But instead of feeling triggered and freaked out and stressed out by them, I can remember them without reliving them. And that is the process. That's what happens when we begin to heal from trauma. We let go of all those intense emotional responses that we have when we think about the difficulties in our lives. The third and final really, really key piece in this whole therapy healing journey when we look at post-traumatic stress is trauma actually causes loss of identity. Now, I know that's a different way of looking at things, but it's actually true. The way I describe it to my clients is, if you think of your soul as being a big mirror, and before you are traumatized, when you look into that mirror, you see yourself from a healthy perspective. You see yourself as, being a good person, being a decent person, having all these strengths. You may be aware of your good points and your bad points, but you see yourself as a whole. Now, if you imagine trauma as being the thing that shatters that mirror, and so you go afterwards, you pick up that mirror, and what you see is you begin to see yourself as broken. That's where your identity becomes distorted and damaged. And what happens is that people actually begin to view themselves, they begin to look at themselves through the lens of the negative past events that they have been through. They begin to look at themselves through the lens of their traumas, instead of being able to look at themselves through the lens of being, positive events, having a healthy sense of self, having a healthy self-esteem. What tends to happen is negative beliefs tend to come in. So things like, I know myself, for years, I had this belief that there was something wrong with me. I actually used to say to myself that, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? I believe that at some level, my life was jinxed, my life was flawed, because I'd had so many major traumatic events, suicide, murder, terrorism, all these things that happened within a very short space of time. So you begin to, it's almost like trauma opens the door to those false beliefs that affect your identity. They begin to come in and they begin to take hold. They almost become strongholds in your life. Beliefs like, I'm not safe in the world, I'm going to die, there's something wrong with me, I don't deserve to be loved. If you look at people who've experienced complex trauma, where there's been lots of, there's been a series of traumas throughout their life, this is very, very common. People will adopt beliefs like, I don't deserve to be loved, I'm not good enough, all of those types of assumptions that we begin to make about ourselves, that we begin to speak over ourselves, that begin to affect our identity and how we see ourselves. Okay, so part of healing trauma, part of releasing trauma, part of the process is about coming back to that solid identity, coming back to that place where you can reconnect to yourself, to the true, the real you, the essence of who you are, the person who you were created to be. and you can reformulate. We talk about cognitive interweaving in EMDR. It's about reformulating those assumptions and those cognitions, changing them, switching them up from negative to positive. So you can begin to adopt those positive beliefs. Instead of I'm not safe, I'm going to die, I am safe. I still have my life ahead of me. It wasn't my fault. I did the best I could at the time with the resources I had. I am worthy of love. I am lovable. What we do as part of the process is we begin to reinstall all of those healthy beliefs and assumptions that form part of having that healthy identity. So I hope that that helps you. I hope that that really helps you to understand post-traumatic stress a little bit more. Drop me a couple of comments, a couple of questions if you have them in the comments below. And please don't forget to click the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video.